When we sit down, it's time for the conversation, and joining me today is Edward Kusewa, who's an economist here with us in studio to help us put some of these issues into context. What truly is ailing Nairobi, and what can it do to catch up, march up, and take the lead as one of the leading cities, not just in the region, in the continent, but also in the whole of the world? Edward, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
Just before we came on air, we were having a really interesting conversation. We were taking Nairobi, looking at Singapore, and also looking at an old city like London. These are cities that are urban areas that have witnessed a lot of rural-urban migration, just like Nairobi. But they seem to be doing well over 50 years later. Where is the discord with Nairobi?
The biggest problem that Nairobi is facing really is all about urban planning, and the concepts of smart cities that other global cities are following. Today, most governments are building cities in the most sustainable manner and the most sustainable fashion. Now, in our country, and especially in Nairobi, the biggest hindrance to being a smart city was obviously two things. One was misappropriation, which means that funds that were meant for expansion, for making sewage systems, for not just affordable housing, sustainable housing, that money was allocated but was misappropriated. And again, not just misappropriation, but it was also embezzled, because misappropriation has the concept of the funds that are meant for a certain project being diverted. And that happened. If you go back and study the history of this country, and especially during Moi's regime, then you will be able to see that a lot of finances that were meant for these cities planning and urban planning, including infrastructure, were all diverted to other sectors. And since then, the city has never recovered.
And speaking of recovery, the rain is beating us literally and on paper. We're in the rainy season, year in, year out. Nairobi is flooding. The CBD is almost inaccessible. A road like Thika Superhighway, which is barely 20 years old, even 10, so to speak, is flooding with water. And that speaks to a perennial problem like proper drainage and sewerage.
Absolutely. I mean, if they are not going to act urgently, and as the population and the demographics continue to grow, and as we attract more people from the rural to urban, this is going to be a very big problem for this country. And so they need to sit down, bring in contractors who have a vision, not just bring in local contractors who do not have the expertise and the skills and the capacity to be able to execute some of these projects. I mean, it's just the execution of projects, project execution. Come up with a systematic plan, which is already there. If you look at the Nairobi County strategic plan and county plans, all these things are there. Put the resources that are necessary and let this planning come into effect.
But how exactly do we fix our drainage problem? Because next year we'll still be here talking about it.
I mean, I think a lot of land that was allocated space, urban spaces that were actually allocated for this kind of infrastructure. I think you know the land issue in this country. Most of this land was either sold, because I mean, this is where sewage pass, and you find a very big building sitting on top of that sewerage as a path. So I think they need to come up and revise. I mean, it's just terrible that we're in this position. I mean, look at right now, it has really rained. We don't have water. I live in Langata, we don't have water. And you can see a lot of this water has just gone far. It hasn't been stored, it hasn't been harvested. So it's all about urban planning, basically. Yeah.
Okay, now, if we plan properly our city and stick to those plans and ensure that where a river was passing, we allow it to be a river, because natural resources do not forget their road, we might be able to fix our drainage problem.
Absolutely. I mean, it's time that all those contingency plans, environmental plans are put into perspective to be able to help this city grow. I mean, very recent cities like Bogota in Colombia, working very closely with the United Nations Habitat, have been able to come up with smart city plans for those cities, and they are now examples, modern examples, and to other cities across the world. So yeah.
And that is just one of the problems that Nairobi faces. Another key area that there have been challenges is the health sector. And very briefly, we shall be crossing over to just listen to why health officials in Nairobi County wanted to go on a strike. But it has been a push and pull and a tussle, and health officials are saying since the onset of devolution, they have never been promoted, and that is not fair, public or private sector. And also there have been questions about the state of health, devolved health, or should it be managed by the national government? But we shall come back to that right after we listen to what health officials from Nairobi County had to say. Listening. What do we attribute this scuffle to? We all know that they sat together and they found a deal, a middle ground. But if we don't address the root cause of some of these issues the doctors are raising, next year we'll still find ourselves at the same place.
Yeah, I mean, the issue of efficiency correlated with health risk is very important. I mean, you need to remunerate people accordingly to the risks that they're exposed. I mean, the health sector indeed does a lot of work for its citizens. They do, nurse wounds, accidents, and all these health risks, other infectious sicknesses or diseases that are health risks. First of all, these health providers. And so the issue of remuneration, which has been there in this country for quite a season, I think they should be able to go back to that CBA, collective bargaining agreements. If you promise people money, I mean, you should just be honest and morally just to give them their due because it was put in paper. But again, you must also understand that this country is a tax-based system. Everything that people get is from taxes. We have not been able to expand the economy to be able now to increase. And we have been heavily brought down by the heavy debt that this country has incurred over the last few years. And I think it's a burden. And now the government is realizing it's in a place where it's not able to remunerate people accordingly. And so and you can imagine a person who's in the health sector who has not been able to be remunerated accordingly, dealing with you as a person. There are all these other, contingencies that we may not be able to speak. So they need to be compensated. Yeah.
And sticking with health, Nairobi has a population of roughly over 4 million people. These are people that need good and quality healthcare. And also not forgetting, because it's the capital, every other person that gets a referral comes to Nairobi. What are some of the intricacies that the county government really needs to pay attention to ensure that healthcare is top-notch in the county?
I think if we do studies globally, the universal health coverage system is very important, and counties should be able to implement health as a priority area, not just anything. I mean, health is the most important function any government should be able to give its people. I think resources should be increased, their capacity and skill training for these people. I mean, when you have a healthy population, that country is very productive. When people believe in the systems, they have confidence in their health systems, and they can be able to work towards collective goals.
What are some of the key areas that we should prioritize?
I mean, one is agriculture. The other areas of obviously health and education. Those are the three main pillars in any economic system that helps a country move forward.
And in terms of health, where should the county government put its money?
I mean, holistically, it's not just one approach. I mean, you need to bring in standards. You need to have efficient delivery of services to the population, and that involves equipping, retooling staff, giving them incentives, and subsidizing, for example, medicine, and so on and so forth.
is it that the quality of our care has gone down, or it's just that the burden that is being put on Nairobi County is way more than it can handle? Because you look at a hospital like Kenyatta, many people would prefer to come to Kenyatta instead of going to Eldoret, which is equally a referral hospital. So how do we also ensure that there's a synergy amongst counties so that one doesn't bear the burden of all?
I think basically, I mean, the bottom line really is resources. I mean, why should people travel all the way from Eldoret to Nairobi to seek health? It's because probably the hospital in Eldoret doesn't have the resources that are adequate. For example, some of those sophisticated health machinery or equipment does not exist in some of these rural counties. But then we have good examples, not just, it's not a cross-cutting issue. There are counties that have been seen to provide very efficient health systems, like for example, Makueni, which is actually, having a system in place, and people don't have to leave Makueni to Nairobi, and that should be replicated in all other areas.
Another touchy subject in the county is garbage and garbage collection. This has been, and it's one of the reasons why the governor of Nairobi currently is wrapped in a court case. But before we just get into that, I'd like us to talk about garbage collection and sanitation. We banned plastic bags, and we've seen at least the garbage situation in Nairobi has slightly improved ever since we took plastic bags away from the market. However, we are not yet there in terms of sanitation according to global standards. So how do we fix our garbage and sanitation issue?
I mean, biodiversity conservation is very important, whether you talk about garbage and garbage collection systems, recycling that garbage to produce energy. I think Nairobi this case has been discussed not just in the county government, but in parliament. I mean, there are strategic plans around how even to collect garbage and turn it into energy, for instance, but it has never been implemented. And and the issue of cartels and the issue of people who get kickbacks to be able now to facilitate the process of collection garbage, I think we need to dismantle and deconstruct most of these systems.
And why do you think Nairobi is here at this point in time where we have very clear mechanisms of how we can clean the city?
Basically three things: governance, 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 and leadership. If you don't have a leadership that is really interested in transformation and transforming this city into a world-class city, for instance, you'll always have those problems.
Okay.
So it's just basically leadership. Yeah.
Now, I want us to talk about the court case that is currently facing the governor, and not necessarily the court case, but some of the issues that will arise from the court case. Just a development from the case: the governor has been barred from accessing his office, and this means that as is, there's no deputy governor. Nairobi County doesn't have a governor to go into office and do his daily duties. And this is not unique. This is not the first time that a governor of Nairobi is being taken to court on corruption allegations. We also saw that the former governor, Evans Kidero, was in this situation. And this might speak to maybe a perennial problem of the fact that Nairobians have not been able to place their finger on a good leader, or just that leaders are not honoring the promises that they made to the people when they were coming into office. Let's listen in to Abide and then come back and discuss this. Where does Nairobi County go from here with this leadership vacuum, and what economic implication could this vacuum possibly hold?
I think One of the things that I've seen globally, especially for cities, metropolitan or cosmopolitan cities, is the separation between politics and development. In our country, we have done that in the Constitution, the separation of powers, and for us to be able to look for experts to be able to develop this country. Unfortunately, county governments have been a political process. And when you bring a politician, then there's always a problem of embezzlement and misappropriation. What we needed to do was to come up with task forces or committees or commissions that run the city, or maybe revert the city back to the national government. Because as it is, I mean, when a person who does not have political leadership is exposed to the kind of revenues that this county collects, there's always that urge of getting some of this money and putting it into private use. So I think we need a different methodology moving forward to be able to separate politics and development. I mean, it's done in Japan, where county governments or governments are run separately by commissions, and that's why you see they are where they are. But when you bring a politician and you attach that politician to bring development in a certain country, it always doesn't work. And this is what we are suffering from. And I think that is what should have been done with the Constitution, that we have something like an economic commission that runs the economy of the country and leave the politicians to do their thing. So we are trying to bring a politician to bring in development, something that is totally impossible.
Now, if you look at Nairobi, just like we had discussed earlier on, it gets the highest revenue allocation. But when you look at the mathematics, the arithmetics doesn't add up in terms of recurrent expenditure, in terms of just the general expenditure, and also in terms of how they use their development kitty. And Senator Sakaja had interesting things to say about the fact that Nairobi County is the county that runs the GDP of the country. Let's listen in and come back to that. It's undeniable, you're smiling, it's undeniable that Nairobi holds great economic impact and a contribution to this country, and its leadership is very key. And Sakaja is just trying to propose some of the ways that we could go in terms of leadership. Moving forward from an economic standpoint, because we understand that Nairobi is the engine that drives the economic vehicle of this country, where do we go from here?
We really need to sort out this mess. I mean, we must be very competitive as an economy. We must be able to attract institutional investors by giving them world-class services. We need to bring down the cost of power. We need to make this city safe and secure so that people who come and invest in this country are able to have that security of the investments and face out all these non-commercial risks that exist. Non-commercial risks are things like political risks, uncertainty, and so on and so forth. So I think this city needs to be brought in order and urgently. I'm very, very disappointed because right now, if you look at the region, the East African region, if you look at Rwanda and Tanzania, these people understand what is happening. The leadership in these countries understand the importance of making cosmopolitan cities places that can be able to attract not just investors, but be able to attract many other things. And we are losing that position. We are losing this position because of this kind of mess where we don't have leadership that is transformative, and as a result, the country and the city seems to go down, including its gross domestic income.
And speaking of cosmopolitan cities, there have been arguments that Nairobi should not be a county, but should just be operated as a cosmopolitan city, an extension of the national government to ensure that it's governed in the proper way in the interest of the whole country. Your 2 cents?
Absolutely. I mean, if we are not getting through, I mean, this city is a big city globally, not just in Africa. If the governors and leadership that we are going to appoint through the devolved system is not working, then the best alternative is revert the county government to the national government.
Now, finally, the president had very interesting remarks to say about corruption, because we know corruption is one of the hurdles that has held this country back years and years on end. The previous governor in office had a case, the current governor has a case, and even while we were in court on Monday, Busia County Governor Sospito Ojamong had a mentioning of his case. So governors and corruption allegations are nothing new, but this is something that is holding back not just Nairobi County, but all counties from development. Let's hear what the head of state had to say. Does presidential goodwill count for something, or we will need to go the extra mile to fight corruption at county levels, Nairobi to be precise, to ensure that public funds are invested where they should and contracts are awarded to those who deserve and not those who have political allies with those in leadership?
I think the president is right, but he should stop making political statements in the, I view most of his talk to corruption is political statement, because if indeed the fight on corruption was serious, then we shouldn't have a lot of people in office, including some of the people who've been mentioned from his own party. He should have been able to streamline the process, and the judicial system should have been able to prosecute people accordingly. But as it is, you know, I view most of this talk around corruption. It's just that very fortunately we have a very, you know, determined DCI who's trying. But, you know, he cannot fight corruption when there's no political will. I term a lot of what the president speaks as political statements. I don't see that political goodwill from his side to prosecute. Otherwise, a lot of people still in office. Why should they be in office? Yeah.
As we almost come to a close of this segment, before we close and head for a break to come back for Social Watch, is it that Nairobi cannot place its finger on the right leader, or the blueprint, the economic blueprint of this region is just wrong, and we really need to rethink what we want out of Nairobi, and then that will inform the kind of leader that we put in office? Very briefly.
Absolutely. We need to rethink, re-strategize. I mean, political leadership is taking this city nowhere. I mean, from where I see it as an economist, I cannot correlate events. I'm not able to try and think why we don't have water, for example, where there's no service delivery. It's so hard to start thinking of these things. And so I think we need to rethink, as you're saying, and we need to re-strategize. Yeah.
In your opinion, is Nairobi losing its appeal?
Absolutely. It is losing its appeal. It lost its appeal back in the day. Yeah.
Okay, we want to take a short breather, but when we come back, before we allow Edward to leave, he must tell us what do we need to do and place a finger on it for Nairobi to regain its appeal, because it was the ultimate destination for the whole continent and also the rest of the world. It was the economic hub, not just of East Africa, but also Africa. After the break, this and much more, particularly Social Watch, where my mic is off and your voice comes on. See you shortly.